Someone warned your soulmate to stay away from you. Then the truth came out. My beloved child, something shifted the instant your name entered a conversation you were never supposed to know about. Your soulmate had expected an ordinary moment. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make them question what they believed about you. But then someone leaned closer and said something strangely specific: you should stay away from them. And for a moment, everything became still. Not because your soulmate immediately believed the warning. Quite the opposite. Something about it felt incomplete. The words sounded certain, but the reason behind them didn't. And that tiny difference became impossible to ignore. Stay a little longer, because what happened next changed the meaning of that warning completely. Your soulmate asked one simple question. Why? There should have been an immediate answer. Instead, there was hesitation. A pause that lasted just a little too long. And sometimes, silence reveals more than a perfect explanation ever could. Your soulmate noticed it too. They began replaying everything they knew about you, the conversations, the quiet moments, the things you had done when nobody was watching. They remembered how your presence had affected them in ways they still couldn't fully explain. So why was someone suddenly trying to create distance? That question became the beginning of something much bigger. Because the person giving the warning finally offered an explanation. They described you as someone who could change your soulmate's direction. Someone whose presence might make them rethink choices they had accepted for years. But listen carefully. That wasn't really a reason to stay away. It sounded more like a reason someone was afraid of what might happen if your soulmate stayed close. And your soulmate recognized it. A thought appeared quietly in their mind. What if I'm not being protected from this person? What if I'm being protected from discovering something? That question changed the atmosphere. Don't rush past this moment, because the truth had not come out yet. Your soulmate was only beginning to notice the cracks in the story. They started asking questions nobody expected. Who started this warning? What exactly were they afraid would happen? And most importantly, why now? The answers didn't line up. One detail contradicted another. Something that had supposedly happened recently seemed connected to something much older. And suddenly your soulmate realized this warning wasn't created because you had done something wrong. It had begun because your presence represented change. You were becoming harder to misunderstand. Harder to define through somebody else's opinion. And perhaps hardest of all, harder to keep away. Wait until you hear what your soulmate discovered next. Because instead of stepping back, they quietly began observing everything for themselves. They stopped listening only to what people said about you and started remembering what they had personally experienced with you. That distinction mattered. They remembered your consistency. Your resilience. The way you kept moving forward even when nobody applauded. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The warning began losing its power. Not because your soulmate ignored it, but because they investigated the feeling underneath it. What if this moment changes the entire path ahead? Your soulmate had been told that getting closer to you could complicate their future. But somewhere inside them came a completely different realization. Maybe you weren't the complication. Maybe you were the person making them finally see clearly. And just when they thought they understood what was happening, one final detail surfaced. A detail connected directly to the person who had warned them. Your soulmate discovered that this person already knew something about you, something they had deliberately left out of the conversation. Something that explained why they wanted distance between you. Your soulmate looked at them differently after that. The warning no longer sounded like advice. It sounded like fear of a truth becoming visible. And that truth? It was about to come out. But your soulmate wasn't prepared for what it would reveal about you, or about the real reason someone wanted them to stay away. You'll understand everything when the missing piece finally appears. The missing piece appeared in the one place your soulmate never thought to look. It wasn't hidden inside another warning. It wasn't buried beneath some dramatic confession. It surfaced through a small contradiction, one sentence that didn't match everything they had been told before. Your soulmate caught it immediately. And once they noticed it, they couldn't unnotice it. The person who had insisted they stay away from you had known far more about you than they originally admitted. They knew about choices you had made quietly. They knew how much you had changed. They even knew about a side of you that your soulmate was only beginning to recognize. So one question became impossible to avoid. If they truly believed you were someone to avoid, why had they been watching your path so closely? Hold on to that question, because this is where the entire story turns. Your soulmate stopped defending you. Not because they agreed with the warning. Because they wanted the other person to keep talking. Sometimes the truth reveals itself when you stop interrupting the story someone is trying too hard to control. And that is exactly what happened. The person continued explaining. But with every new sentence, another inconsistency appeared. They claimed they were only concerned about your soulmate's future, yet almost everything they said focused on how different your soulmate had become since you entered their thoughts. More independent. More willing to question expectations. More determined to choose their own direction. Then your soulmate understood something extraordinary. The warning had never truly been about who you were. It was about who your soulmate was becoming, because knowing you had awakened something inside them. Stay with this, because that realization was only the doorway. Your soulmate remembered something you once said, something simple that had seemed almost insignificant at the time. You had encouraged them to trust what they could observe for themselves instead of automatically accepting somebody else's version of reality. Now those words returned with completely different meaning. And suddenly the warning sounded less like protection and more like resistance to change. Your soulmate asked another question. If I stay away, what exactly becomes better? Silence. There it was again. That uncomfortable pause. Except this time, your soulmate didn't fill the silence for them. They waited. And finally, the person admitted something unexpected. They had noticed your soulmate becoming different whenever your name came up. More hopeful about their future. More courageous about decisions they had delayed. More willing to imagine a life beyond familiar expectations. That was what unsettled them. Not you. Change. Before we go deeper, if this story is connecting with you, share it with someone who enjoys messages about truth and transformation. Leave your perspective in the comments, and subscribe if you want to continue this journey together. Now listen closely, because your soulmate still hadn't reached the biggest revelation. After that conversation ended, they began looking backward. Not emotionally. Carefully. They compared what they had personally witnessed with what they had been told about you. And the two versions barely resembled each other. Your soulmate remembered moments when you could have chosen attention but chose patience instead. Moments when you could have tried to prove yourself but simply continued moving forward. That mattered. Because genuine character often becomes clearest when nobody is asking for a performance. And then something else clicked. The person who gave the warning had once spoken positively about you. Long before your soulmate became deeply interested. Why had their opinion suddenly changed? Don't skip this next piece. Your soulmate searched their memory and realized exactly when the shift happened. It happened when they stopped treating you like a passing curiosity. And started seeing you as someone who might genuinely belong in their future. That was the turning point. The warning came afterward. And now your soulmate could finally see the pattern. Someone wasn't simply reacting to you. They were reacting to the possibility of you and your soulmate choosing a direction that nobody else could control. But there was still one question left unanswered. Why did this person care so much? Your soulmate was about to discover the answer through something they were never meant to hear. And when those words finally reached them, every warning, every contradiction, and every strange hesitation suddenly connected. Because the person who said, "Stay away from them," had been hiding one final reason. And that reason had almost nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with what they were afraid your soulmate would discover about themselves. What your soulmate heard next didn't answer just one question, it rearranged the entire story. A conversation reached them unexpectedly. Your name came up again, but this time nobody realized your soulmate would learn what had been said. And without the usual careful wording, the real concern finally surfaced. It wasn't, "What if this person disappoints you?" It was something completely different. "What if you choose a life we didn't choose for you?" That sentence changed everything. Your soulmate finally understood why the warnings had grown stronger precisely when their feelings about you became clearer. The closer they moved toward making their own decisions, the more resistance appeared around them. And suddenly, staying away from you wasn't really the goal. Keeping everything familiar was. Wait till the final moment, because your soulmate was about to make a realization even they hadn't expected. They thought about who they had been before you entered their awareness. They had followed certain patterns simply because those patterns were familiar. They had accepted opinions without examining them. They had delayed choices because disappointing others felt easier than trusting themselves. Then something changed. Not because you demanded it. Not because you tried to reshape them. Your presence simply made certain questions impossible to ignore. What do I actually want? What kind of future feels authentic to me? Am I living from my own understanding, or somebody else's expectations? Those questions were powerful. And now your soulmate understood why someone might have wanted distance between you. Because once a person begins thinking independently, returning to the old version of themselves becomes difficult. But there was another surprise. Your soulmate didn't immediately run toward you after discovering the truth. They became quiet. Very quiet. Because this was no longer about proving whether someone else had been right or wrong. They needed to know whether their connection with you was something they genuinely valued, independent of every outside voice. So they tested it privately. They imagined walking away completely. No more wondering about you. No more imagining what might happen. No more allowing your presence to influence how they pictured tomorrow. And something unexpected happened. The future didn't feel peaceful. It felt incomplete. Not because they believed they couldn't move forward without you, but because walking away simply to satisfy somebody else would mean abandoning their own judgment. That distinction changed everything. Stay a little longer. The most important truth is here. Your soulmate finally realized that the greatest choice in front of them wasn't between you and another person. It was between fear and awareness. Between living according to assumptions and discovering reality personally. Between accepting a warning without evidence and allowing time, honesty, and experience to reveal who you actually are. So they made a quiet decision. They would stop judging you through borrowed opinions. They would watch your actions. They would listen carefully. They would allow truth to reveal itself naturally. And almost immediately, something became clear. The version of you they had been warned about wasn't the person they recognized. They saw someone still growing. Someone building. Someone becoming stronger through experiences other people knew almost nothing about. And perhaps that was the real revelation all along. You didn't need to defeat the warning. Truth simply needed enough time to outlast it. Now your soulmate understands something they didn't understand before. Anyone can tell them whom to avoid, whom to trust, or which direction to choose. But eventually, they have to look at reality with their own eyes. And that is exactly what they are beginning to do. The warning that was supposed to create permanent distance produced the opposite result. It made them curious. Curiosity made them question. Questions exposed contradictions. And those contradictions finally led them toward the truth. But one mystery remains. Because now that your soulmate knows why someone wanted them to stay away from you, they have to decide what happens next. Do they return to the familiar path everyone expected? Or do they finally follow the future they have quietly been imagining? That decision hasn't been spoken aloud yet. But something inside them has already changed. And once that change becomes visible, the people around them may finally understand why keeping you apart was never as simple as saying, "Stay away." Then came the choice nobody around your soulmate had prepared for. They didn't argue. They didn't make a dramatic announcement. They simply stopped allowing other people to finish the story for them. That quiet change was more powerful than anyone expected. For the first time, your soulmate began separating three things they had once mixed together: what they had been told about you, what they feared might happen, and what they had actually experienced. The difference was impossible to ignore. Most of the warning had been built around possibilities. Maybe you would change their plans. Maybe they would become too attached to a future nobody understood. Maybe choosing you would take them beyond the comfortable world they already knew. But your soulmate noticed something. Nobody could point to the moment when you had actually asked them to abandon themselves. Nobody could identify the moment when you demanded that they choose you over everyone else. And that absence mattered. Before you go, hear this line carefully: sometimes the strongest truth isn't hidden in what happened. It becomes visible through what never happened at all. Your soulmate began seeing the situation with completely different eyes. The person they had been warned about, you, wasn't pulling them away from their identity. You were making them examine it. There is a difference. A huge one. And once they understood that, the fear surrounding your name began fading. But something even more surprising happened next. The same person who had originally warned your soulmate noticed the change. They expected your soulmate to create distance from you. Instead, your soulmate became calmer, more thoughtful, less reactive, and far more difficult to influence with vague claims. So another conversation happened. This time, your soulmate was ready. They asked directly, "If there's something I genuinely need to know, tell me the truth. Not what you think might happen. Tell me what you actually know." The answer changed the atmosphere immediately. Because there was no hidden revelation about you. No secret fact that suddenly proved every warning correct. There was only concern about what your soulmate might choose if they continued trusting their own perspective. And finally, the truth was completely visible. Someone had tried to protect an old future by making a new future look uncertain. Pause there. Because your soulmate understood something much larger than this one situation. People sometimes resist change not because the new direction is wrong, but because they understand the old version of you better. Your soulmate was changing. Their standards were changing. Their vision was changing. Even the way they imagined the next chapter of their life was changing. And somehow, your presence had become connected to that transformation. Not as the person controlling it. As the person who helped them recognize that another path could exist. If this message gave you a new perspective, you can share it with someone who might connect with it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so we can continue exploring stories like this together. Because there is one final turn. Your soulmate has stopped asking, "Why did they warn me about you?" Now they're asking something far more important. What do I believe after seeing everything for myself? That question cannot be answered by friends. It cannot be answered by assumptions. And it cannot be answered by someone else's expectations. Your soulmate knows that whatever comes next must be chosen with clarity. So they aren't rushing. They're watching. Listening. Remembering. And slowly building their own understanding of you. The warning was meant to close a door before your soulmate could discover what stood behind it. Instead, it made them look closer. And what they found wasn't a reason to disappear. They found a reason to stop allowing fear of the unknown to make decisions for them. Now imagine what happens when your soulmate finally speaks that realization aloud. Imagine the silence in the room when the person who once said, "Stay away," realizes those words no longer hold the same power. Because the truth has already done something the warning could never undo. It gave your soulmate their own perspective. And from this moment forward, whatever they decide about you will finally belong to them. The old story ends there. But the future? That is where the real mystery begins. Nobody expected your soulmate to notice the one detail that had been hiding in plain sight. For days, they had been thinking about the warning from every possible angle. But instead of focusing on the words themselves, they suddenly remembered when those words had first appeared. The timing was too precise. Nobody had warned them when you were simply another person in their world. Nobody seemed concerned when your conversations were casual. The concern appeared only after your soulmate started talking differently about their future. That realization stopped them cold. Because something had changed inside them long before anyone said, "Stay away." They had started believing that their life could become bigger than the version they had quietly accepted. They began imagining new possibilities. Different choices. A future designed with intention instead of habit. And somehow, your name kept appearing near those thoughts. Not because you had promised them some perfect tomorrow. You hadn't. You had simply become connected to a feeling they could no longer ignore, the feeling that they were capable of choosing differently. Then your soulmate remembered another detail. The person who warned them had once asked a strange question about you. What exactly do you see in this person? At the time, your soulmate gave an ordinary answer. But now they realized the question had never real. By the time your soulmate understood what was really happening, the question was no longer whether they should believe the warning. The question was why it had taken them so long to trust their own observations. Something had become unmistakable. Every time they examined your actions instead of someone else's interpretation, the story changed. They remembered moments nobody else knew about. Small details. Ordinary conversations. The way you responded when there was nothing to gain. The way you continued building your path without needing everyone to understand it. Those memories carried more weight now. Because your soulmate finally realized that someone had handed them a conclusion before giving them the freedom to gather their own evidence. And they were finished living that way. But don't move past this moment too quickly. Something else had started happening. The person who originally warned your soulmate could sense that their influence was fading. So they tried one final approach. They didn't criticize you this time. Instead, they questioned the future. What happens if everything changes? Your soulmate thought about that sentence for a long moment. Then something almost surprising happened. They smiled. Because change was exactly what they were no longer afraid of. Not reckless change. Not abandoning everything they valued. But growth. Discovery. The possibility that tomorrow didn't have to look exactly like yesterday. That realization opened a door inside them. Your soulmate began thinking about all the choices they had postponed because they were waiting for certainty. But certainty rarely arrives before the first step. Sometimes clarity appears because you finally allow yourself to explore what is true. And that was exactly what they intended to do with you. Not create fantasies. Not assume an outcome. Discover. They would judge this connection by what actually unfolded. By consistency. By honesty. By whether both people could continue becoming stronger without losing themselves. And suddenly, the warning seemed strangely small compared with the understanding they had gained. Here is where the story becomes even more unexpected. Your soulmate eventually asked the person who warned them one last question. Were you afraid of this person? Or were you afraid I would change? There was no immediate response. But your soulmate didn't need one anymore. They had already found their answer. The real tension had never been created by some hidden darkness surrounding you. It came from uncertainty surrounding who your soulmate might become if they started making choices from their own awareness. That truth didn't make them angry. It made them clear. And clarity is difficult to reverse. Stay until this final piece, because everything that happened was leading here. Your soulmate now understands that choosing their own direction doesn't require rejecting everyone who cares about them. They can listen to advice without surrendering their judgment. They can respect another person's concerns without allowing those concerns to become their identity. And they can learn who you truly are without pretending they already know how the story ends. That is the transformation nobody anticipated. The warning was supposed to make your soulmate close the door. Instead, it taught them how important it was to look through that door with their own eyes. Now your soulmate stands at a completely different point than where this began. At first, they heard, "Stay away." Then came doubt. Then questions. Then contradictions. Then truth. And finally, choice. Nobody can tell you exactly where that choice will lead. That is what makes the next chapter meaningful. Because your soulmate isn't moving toward a guaranteed outcome. They are moving toward an honest one. They are no longer searching for permission to understand you. They are simply paying attention. And somewhere beneath all those old warnings, expectations, and unanswered questions, one thought keeps returning. What if the person I was told to avoid is the person I was supposed to understand for myself? Perhaps that is why everything had to unfold this way. Not to prove that every warning was wrong, but to teach your soulmate something far more valuable. Never allow someone else's fear to become your truth before you have looked at reality yourself. The warning has finally lost its power. The truth has finally come out. And now, for the first time, whatever happens between you and your soulmate can begin without somebody else deciding the ending first. Just when your soulmate believed every hidden layer had finally been uncovered, one last conversation changed the meaning of everything. It happened quietly. No confrontation. No dramatic scene. Just a few unexpected words from someone who had watched the entire situation from a distance. They told your soulmate, "There's something you were never told about why this started." That sentence immediately reopened the mystery. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. And what they learned wasn't another rumor about you. It was the missing origin of the warning itself. Long before anyone told your soulmate to stay away, someone had noticed how differently they behaved whenever you became part of the conversation. Their energy changed. Their confidence became stronger. They started questioning plans they had once accepted automatically. But here was the detail nobody had explained. Those changes had already been happening inside your soulmate. You didn't create them. You revealed them. Pause here, because that difference matters more than it seems. For months, your soulmate had quietly wanted something different from their future. They wanted greater purpose. more independence. A life that actually reflected the person they were becoming. But they kept postponing those thoughts. Then you appeared. And somehow, watching you continue on your own path reminded them of everything they had been afraid to pursue themselves. That was why your presence became so significant. Not because you arrived to rescue them. Not because some invisible force guaranteed an ending. But because you became a mirror for possibilities they had stopped allowing themselves to imagine. And suddenly, the original warning made complete sense. Someone saw your soulmate changing and assumed removing you would remove the change. But they misunderstood something fundamental. Once awareness begins, it doesn't simply disappear because one person leaves the room. Your soulmate had already awakened to the questions. Who am I becoming? What do I genuinely value? Which decisions are actually mine? What kind of future would I choose if nobody were watching? Stay with this moment, because your soulmate finally answered one of those questions. They realized they didn't want to return to the person they had been before all of this began. That version of them wasn't wrong. They had simply been unfinished. Now they were learning to think before agreeing. To observe before judging. To ask questions before accepting conclusions. And yes, to understand you before deciding what place, if any, you should have in their future. That is when something remarkable happened. Your soulmate stopped needing the warning to be proven completely false. They understood that even sincere advice can come from limited information. Someone can care about you and still misunderstand what is best for you. Someone can fear change without realizing that change may be exactly what helps you grow. And someone can tell you to walk away while your own experience quietly tells you to look closer. The story was no longer about choosing sides. It was about choosing awareness. Your soulmate returned mentally to the first moment they heard those words. Stay away from them. Back then, the sentence sounded powerful. Now, it sounded incomplete. Because your soulmate had learned the question that should always follow a warning. Based on what? That question had uncovered everything. Assumptions. Expectations. Fear of change. And eventually, the truth. But there is one final shift you need to hear. Your soulmate isn't standing where they were at the beginning anymore. They aren't waiting for somebody to tell them what you mean. They aren't rushing to label the connection. They are allowing reality to speak through time, consistency, and actions. And whatever comes next will be different because of that. Maybe the greatest revelation wasn't simply that someone warned your soulmate about you. Maybe it was what your soulmate discovered while investigating that warning. They discovered their own voice. Their own judgment. Their own vision of tomorrow. And now the person who was once told to stay away is looking toward the future with an entirely different question. What if I finally stop choosing from fear, and start choosing from what I know to be true? That question is still unfolding. And the answer may become the beginning of a chapter nobody saw coming.